Welcome to Ask the Educator, a podcast brought to you by Healthmark Industries. Are you a sterile processing technician or manager? Maybe you work in infection prevention or biomedical engineering. Whether you're a frontline tech, endoscopy tech, OR nurse, or surgical services administrator, you undoubtedly have influence in medical device processing at your facility. In each episode, we speak with experts from the Healthmark Clinical Affairs team, industry leaders, or special guests from the trenches to answer your questions and bring you relevant industry information, equipping you for excellence in medical device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, and I will be your host. Now let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to the Ask the Educator podcast. This is your host, Kevin Anderson, joined with my co-host, Adam Okada. Adam, thanks for setting this up and working your magic with all these podcasts with me. It's really helpful and great to have you as always.
Of course, happy to be here.
All right, man. So this episode, I wanted to get into a little bit of the details regarding insulation testing. People have probably heard, Sharon's presentation and probably read the articles and all this stuff in the Process magazine, and that's great. And the fact is, this is kind of I don't want to say a new issue, but there's been a spotlight on insulation testing ever since the amendments came out, and we just kind of continue to learn stuff about it. So one of the things that happened recently was I actually posted a very important step that I think is missed very often in insulation testing programs. I posted it on LinkedIn, and that is the testing of bipolar forceps. These are coated forceps, and unfortunately, they just kind of get forgotten about or whatever in a typical insulation testing procedure. So that being said, I got an interesting comment from somebody by the name of Rebecca Peplau, and she has been willing to join us on this podcast. So I just wanted to introduce Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. We're going to get right into what it's about, but I just wanted to welcome you first. So we really appreciate having you.
Yeah, thank you for having me back again. Very excited to talk about this one.
Yeah. So basically what we did was I posted that bipolar forceps, and I actually, I don't know if you noticed this, Rebecca, and that's why you commented it, but I believe the picture had a Kerwin brand forcep in there. And I actually had the kilovolt setting and all of that stuff was visible on there. And then you had made a comment on it because you had learned something very unique. So I wanted to kind of just set that stage for you and kind of let the listeners know what it was that you commented and what led up to that.
Yeah, so I saw your post about testing the bipolar forceps, and we've been dealing with an issue with some Kerwan 3-hole Yazergill style bipolar forceps. And so we are a level 1 trauma specialty hospital. So we use these a lot in our crani or neuro services. And so we were buying new ones and they were getting tested, and then the tips are like a gold. I don't know if they're plated or if they're just colored like that. But we noticed that they were kind of flaking or getting cracked or pitted. And that also, like, right where the surgeon would hold the bipolar forcep and like pinch it together, we would have pinholes in the insulation in that spot. And so we're ordering them, sending them out, ordering them, failing, ordering them, they're failing, they're damaged, ordering new ones. We're like, what is going on here? Like, what? We're following the IFU to a T. We've traced them from point of use to decontam through prep and pack. There's nothing, like, we're not deviating from the IFU and we're not damaging them. So what is going on? And so our quality management coordinator, his name is Colby. He is one of the masters of my department as well. He worked with our operating room lead for the neuro service to try to figure out what the heck was going on here. And they reached out to Kerwan Surgical Products, or KSP, And they responded back with like a really in-depth email about insulation testing these forceps. And it was really interesting because the normal IFU does not state anything about specific kilovolts that we have to test at. That email basically, I don't know if you guys want me to read off any of that or not.
Well, why don't you just give us the main point from the email that kind of surprised you?
So one of the main points is basically if you continually test powder-coated instruments, including Kerwan's bipolar forceps, at 3.5 kilovolts, you will quickly degrade the insulation, burn a hole in it, and the instrument will fail. So basically, there was also some points of this email where they basically stated that you need to test them at 1.5 kilovolts in the field. The new standard states you must withstand a test at 1 kilovolts. So basically, for Kerwan's bipolar forceps, the math comes out to 1.39 kilovolts. A test setting of 1.5 kilovolts will be fine for Kerwan bipolar forceps. Monopolar is 3.5, still normal. So because of this email, basically it's saying you have to test them at 1.5. The insulation testers that we had a low and a high setting, and the low setting was still 2 point something. So this was the only spot that we were able to identify, like, all right, maybe we are burning holes through the instruments, and this is what's going on. So that led us to purchase the McGanns because we could dial down or up more specifically. And since then, we really haven't been seeing any more issues, especially with the tips.
Yeah, and I think that's the real key point, is that if we, like, according to the letter from Kerwan, if we're testing at 3.3 to 3.5, which a lot of insulation testers, that's the default setting.
Right.
That's what they test at. Then we could be damaging them.
Yeah, the McGann forcep, I think there's like the standard, like the bipolar attachment, doesn't it say like 4.2 or 3?
The little key that's on that comes with the McGann.
Yes.
Yeah, so it has this voltage setting that's recommended for bipolar forceps, but again, it doesn't take into consideration specific manufacturers and their IFUs.
Right.
And that's what's interesting, is this IFU doesn't have that voltage setting. It was only after reaching out to the manufacturer after seeing damage that then they responded with a letter, which I find interesting because in the industry, that's kind of the standard thing, is about 3.3, 3.5. And of course, a lot of the bipolars can go at higher, like to 4.0. So very interesting stuff that you found out of this letter.
Yeah, it was really cool that my team was able to track this down. And it's something very, like, I wonder if we're gonna keep seeing this trend, because the standards were set with the amendments that came out, the 2020 amendments, and there's still plenty of places that aren't doing this. So to finally get something in writing and updated that matches our standards, like the letter actually addressed, Joint Commission has instructed hospitals on the need to high potential test all electrical surgical instruments during sterile processing. Like, they acknowledged that our standards had changed, and then they as a company did their own validation and stuff like that as well. So I think that's awesome, but at the same time, it's not, just like any IFU change, it's not getting back to the public, it's not getting back to the end user. So how do we figure this out, right?
No, you're right. And it's interesting because these are really it's a really good brand. It's a really good forcep. It's high demand for surgeons like that you described. Neurosurgeons really love this brand. There's nothing wrong with the instrument. But it is interesting when you purchase new instruments and you start to see damage so quickly. And then you go and actually do the investigation part to figure out what could have went wrong, and you get an answer like that. That is pretty eye-opening, and it makes you wonder, like, what other instruments are out there that potentially we could be inadvertently damaging, only because in the IFU it doesn't necessarily specify. And hopefully now that they have seen it and they address that in the email, that maybe in their updated version of the IFU, it will have all of that stuff in there. That would be fantastic. But it does beg the question, have you guys had the chance to kind of look into and investigate any more instruments? Have you discovered any others that have similar, or have you kind of just not really been able to get into the weeds with other instruments yet, or you haven't noticed any problems maybe?
We haven't noticed any other problems with any other forceps, but I know we use like Medtronic bipolar forceps, like the ones from the Metrics instrument set. Those ones we have as like individuals. So those are like next on my list of like, let's hunt this down and see what's going on. And there's a couple other instruments as far as like laparoscopic instruments, even like, do we need to look at that as well? So haven't really had a lot of time to dive in, but I've started to make my list of things that we need to check. So,
I think what listeners need to take away from this podcast, if anything, is that first of all, if you're seeing a lot of damage with Yes or Gill Kirwan bipolar forceps, it could be that we're testing them incorrectly or at the wrong voltage, and it's actually damaging the coating to the forcep itself, and that's what's actually causing it. So that's one of the key takeaways. And the other thing is, if you do have insulated instruments and it doesn't state like a voltage level in the IFU, you may need to reach out to the manufacturer to find out what isn't there.
I'm curious how many more have actually done these tests.
Yeah. And the other thing is too, I mean, we have in these insulation testers, but some of them you can't change the settings on them. So we also need to make sure that we have one where you can adjust the settings to what the manufacturers tell you to be at. Again, Healthmark does give a little cheat sheet. It comes with the McGann that kind of tells you this is the type of instrument and here's the voltage you want to test it on. That's kind of a general outline. But if the IFUs from the manufacturer are different, then you do have to look at those and then see what you need to do to fix it.
It's interesting because like one of the lines in the email they sent back was sterile processing departments and hospitals are being told to high potential test all electrosurgical instruments, which high potential is insulation test. However, they have not been given guidelines on how this should be done. Powder coated bipolar instruments should be tested at 1.5. Monopolar instruments should be tested at 3.5. An additional problem lies within the insulation testers. The instructions for use on many of these testers do not state the voltages of their various settings. Some only have one suitable setting for lap instruments, likely 3 to 3.5. Again, if you continually test powder-coated instruments, including Kirwan bipolars at 3.5, you will quickly degrade the insulation, burn a hole in it, and the instrument will fail. So that is interesting because if I recall, we had to pull the IFU for the other ones that we have. I think there was like some hunting we had to do to find out what the low setting was and what the high setting was.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point there, Rebecca. For a lot of people out there, they do have this equipment, but a lot of these insulation testers, like you said, they come equipped with a setting either high or low, or just a test button is another one we've seen. And with that, we don't really know what the kilovolts assigned to those levels are. I know we've done some internal testing. Johanna Zizi here at Healthmark has done some testing to figure out what those are, but I'm sure it's something that you as a customer could reach out to the manufacturer of the insulation tester and find out exactly how many kilovolts are coming from the low setting or how many are coming from the high setting. But either way, it's good to know that. But if you have instruments in your inventory like Kirwan that require a 1.5 setting, then unfortunately you're not going to have the flexibility to set it there with some of those insulation testers that are out there. So that's something that people really need to be aware of as they build their program out. And obviously no one wants to damage brand new instruments. So this was a really huge find. And that's why I wanted to bring you on, Rebecca. I think one, it was great that you even piped up on the social media posts, especially given that you knew something very unique. And I'm so glad that you shared it. I'm so glad that you came on the podcast and shared that with our listeners. I think it's so valuable. But one thing I wanted to share with any listener out there that's listening to the story is that one thing, and Rebecca was very good. She gave credit to her team, and that's really important as a leader. in her department. But they went and they actually contacted the manufacturer to get answers to their questions. Why are these things getting damaged? And they went that extra mile. And I think a lot of times we stop there. We stop when we have a problem and we're like, oh man, there's a problem with this manufacturer. Their instruments aren't any good. We need to go and find a different one. And all the while, it was really an issue with the insulation testing procedure and not necessarily anything wrong with the instrument. So kudos to your team. I just wanted to encourage people out there that may run into issues. Don't neglect that little step of trying to reach out to the manufacturer. I know it can be a little bit like intimidating, or maybe you don't know who to even reach out to because some companies are rather large, or maybe you don't even know who your rep is in the area. Make sure people are using that as a step. Sometimes IFUs aren't available, whether it's through one source or even on the company's website. And we have to be able to communicate and reach out to the manufacturer to get them. So again, I just wanted to thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate you sharing your takeaways with us about this very specific little niche area of insulation testing. Is very important, and wanted to just thank you for helping us get that message out to the masses.
Yeah, it's going to be, I'm really excited to see what the future holds with this kind of stuff. And I'm kind of looking forward to doing some more research and seeing what's going to come out in the next, in a little bit here, even though the standards have been out for a couple of years now. I'm just, let's see what continues to come out, especially when something like this is being emailed to a user. I'm very curious and excited. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use.